Welcome, everybody. Here is our first slide. And it's going to answer a question Irene had last week. She wanted to be a Pizarro. And here's the Battle of Cajamarca. This was an unbelievable time to be a Pizarro. They invited Atahualpa, who was the chief of the Incas, to please meet them. And they'd been in the territory, and actually Atahualpa had made a few subtle moves, hoping that Pizarro would choose Cajamarca, because he showed up and he had 80,000 troops surrounding Cajamarca, and he had reportedly 6,000 inside the town. And Pizarro and his men were going to ambush. They were in these little alcoves. Some of them with horses. So they had 30 horses and 180 men against 6,000, mind you. So a little bit like Cortez. By the way, one of the Pizarros was a second cousin to Cortez. They had different mothers. So the odds were against them. Pizarro sent out the priest with the Bible. And it was a little bit like what we saw in Tenochtitlan after Montezuma had treated them to a few human sacrifices. The priest had enough and pulled out the Bible. And Atahualpa at first was, well, okay, let me take a look at this. And I don't know what he was expecting, but he was disappointed. And he threw the Bible on the ground. And that was the signal. The signal was given. The horses came roaring out of their hiding places, 30 of them, 180 men with their steel. Mind you, the germs had preceded them. So there'd already been a wave of smallpox, which was had contributed to the chaos. There was a civil war among the Incas going on over succession. So guns, germs, and steel. And one thing led to another. And just like Cortez kidnapping Montezuma, the Pizarros kidnapped Atahualpa. And I'm not going to spend any more time talking about how this played out. You can imagine it played out pretty much the same way. So a very similar story. Now, the Pizarro brothers, you probably wouldn't want to be any of them. So there's four of them. It's Francisco, who was the legal commander, the governor, if you will. He was the official, and his brothers were freelancers. Basically, they joined up as mercenaries. And they were given and took a lot of responsibility. One died in the later siege of Cusco. He couldn't get his helmet on because he'd been wounded in the jaw. Francisco himself was assassinated after they successfully conquered the Incas by his own men. Hernando went back to Spain to give a report, and he was quite happy at the way things had gone. but they imprisoned him for tax evasion, for underreporting. He was in prison for 60 years, and he was the longest lived, dying in 1578. Gonzalo was brutal and corrupt, and was finally executed for a rebellion by the people who took over, and said, let's get rid of the last Pizarro, and they did. Francisco was capable, Juan was daring, Hernando was the intellect and advisor, but none of them had a happy ending. All right, so on we go. I wanted to, I realized that when I was reviewing the Pashtuns and going back through history, that we just finished 5,000 years of civilization. So I just want to zip real through, straight through the model I've been building. I've talked about the 6 types of institutions that I think constitute civilization. Here they are. You're familiar with them. I've color coded them in the past. Religion, ethics, law, material rewards from trade, economic activity, consent, big step, the science that we saw at universities, particularly in the Renaissance, and then in Florence, where we spent a lot of time, appreciation of the arts. All those are just solid bulwarks that support civilization. But I'm going to add them sequentially. I'm going to stack them one on top of another. And the basic problem, the stack is going to go up. At the bottom of the stack is the basic problem of human nature and violence. That wherever you go, alpha males, and if they're charismatic, their clan, their tribe, can cause a lot of trouble. And Steven Pinker has studied the archaeology and the causes of death and hunter-gatherers, and it's violence. 15% of skeletons that they found show that they died by violence. It's pretty high. And the examples that we've seen of that. And
sorry, John, dying by violence, meaning human on human, or that animals attack them?
Evidence of human on human, skull trauma, things that were pretty clear human on human.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. So we see this just randomly certainly with the Vikings, and I don't know, maybe Afghanistan at certain periods where you have the Pashtun blood feuds that I'm going to get to later on. Then you add a layer. As time goes by, we certainly saw chaos after the fall of Rome, the Dark Ages, but gradually the warlords considered themselves to be nobles and hereditary nobles. So and so there was a certain stability with a dynasty that was added. You had some legitimacy, maybe through birthright, that might control the violence and tamp it down a little bit. Eventually, there's a chief warlord of all warlords, and that's a monarch. And so we've seen the emergence of monarchy in France and in England as we studied the Middle Ages. And presumably with that eventually came the institution of security, a police monopoly, if you will. Now they can be ruthless and intolerable, but the background violence may fall. We remember traveling to Franco, Spain, and hearing how few murders there were. So institutional police. And all these levels push the level of violence down to the left. That's the direction of progress in my visual model. So let's add another layer which pushes it more to the left. You add some religion, some respect for spirituality. That's got to help. And the examples that I went through, Juan Jose and I in the early days with Egypt, India. I'd argue the Abrahamic religions, certainly not the Aztecs. That was a religion that did not reduce violence. Then you add the layer of law and ethics, nudging the background level of violence even more. Once you had Confucius's ideas accepted in China, there were longer periods of peaceful dynasties. Hammurabi in Mesopotamia, ditto. Roman law, big step forward, the codification of official rules. And we saw with common law, Alfred the Great in Britain and introduced the common law that we have in our society today, as opposed to European society. And that was a tension in Brexit. British were used to common law, and on the continent, it's Roman law. Very, very different way of practicing, as we discussed. And then add trade and prosperity. If everybody's got skin in the game, they're going to be less likely to participate and sign up for any violence. And we saw that in Sumeria, the camel trade bought a level of civilization, a new level of civilization. We certainly saw that in the Italian city-state with the trading city-states like Venice and Milano. And with Islam, we saw it in Sufi Islam. Sufi was a peaceful kind of Islam, and Sufi traders made it all the way to Indonesia, all the way to Indonesia. We're going to see, as we look at the history of the Pashtuns, Indian traders, not just across the sea, but heading north, a north-south trade between India. And gave everybody an incentive to be loyal to the rules lower down, and the ethics, the religion, and then add a huge step, the notion of official consent. Look, they're everywhere in all places. There's always been a system like village elders. And Aiko and I were lucky enough to actually witness that when we traveled in Gujarat, in the high hills of Gujarat. And we saw a venue where not just property and divorce, but where murders were handled. And that's often the way, as we'll see when we talk about the Pashtuns in the hill country. They've got, in the mountainous areas, they've got their own way of dealing with murders. And it usually involves restitution of some kind. Quite often it involves just revenge, which isn't very productive. But the official consent, the Roman Senate. That was 500 years before Christ. So about the same time Greece was having its golden age, there was a Roman Senate. Now, over the centuries, it became corrupt and lost power. And finally, you had Julius Caesar and all the emperors. But for a period, that was a big step forward to give citizens a sense of, and certainly it wasn't all citizens. There was a lot of slavery in these institutions, and it didn't include women. But nevertheless, with there was a minority of people giving consent. And you can look at the American Revolution and see a bit of that too. So if you have a feeling you're participating, you're going to not join up with a gang. And then we saw with, particularly with the Renaissance, reason, science, and writing. We saw the university system spring up, starting in Bologna. And we saw Petrarch advocating the study of the ancients and reinvigorating the Greek accomplishments. And then just for administration, you have educated people who maybe not only know law, but know how to keep track of stuff, how important double entry accounting was in the Italian city-states, that it was counted as a step forward, keeping track of records. And then medicine, not very good, still imprisoned to Galen, but at least they're starting to look inside the body. They don't know what to do with it yet, but they're beginning. And then, of course, we saw on the same plane the Mayans' accomplishment in math and astronomy and agriculture, the Three Sisters. And we saw the Aztecs actually had some technology, agricultural technology. And finally, we spent a lot of time on the last level of civilization at the very top. The beauty of expression in Florence that Carol and Aiko and Tina shared with us. And so I put that on the very top, and you got that going, and you have people enjoying life in a reasonable scientific situation, giving their consent, participating in the economy, benefits from the efficiency of trading, everybody respecting the laws and the ethics, and possibly a mythic religion helps too. This is kind of my quick run through civilization, some of the ways that I've and trying to explain things to Juan Jose of organized thoughts. And you'll see that I'll apply some of those to the Pashtuns. So off we go to the Pashtuns. By the way, I'd welcome feedback. I know this isn't a place to give feedback. If it wasn't helpful, I'd appreciate you telling me, or any suggestions of improvement for a way of conceptualizing anything I've got wrong, anything I've left out. I'd appreciate individual feedback. On to the Pashtuns, and we're going to start at the beginning. We're going to start with language, because I think more important than ethnicity is culture, and culture is reflected in language. So I'm going to use a lot of linguistic maps. Some of you've already seen them in other presentations, but let's just start with the basic Indo-European language. This goes back a millennia. It started in an area now identified as Turkmenistan, and a group of people called Aryans, or Yamnaya is another name for Indo-European. Hitler gave Aryan a bad name, but this is where the language started. And it spread to all these areas. You see, it's all in Europe, light green, one exception here, Hungary, one exception up here, Finland, and they're possibly Altaic. I'll talk about Altaic a little bit later on. But the discovery of Indo-European languages was when a British linguist was in India in the 1780s, and discovered that the Sanskrit word for horse was very much like the Lithuanian word for horse. And he said that can't be a coincidence. And one thing led to another, and we have this map of the widespread use of Indo-European languages. And the reason I'm talking about it is Pashto, that the Pashtun speak, is an Indo-European language. It's different. And here you see the different branches of the Indo-European. You'll see there's an Indo-Iranian branch, and that's includes Afghanistan. And Pashto is one of the Indo-Iranian languages. You're seeing some disruption to Indo-European here, because as we're going to see later on, we're going to get the Altaic people coming down, the Turkic people, the Mongolian people. They do not speak Indo-European languages. And Chinese is its own thing. And last but certainly not least, the fourth major language group is the Semitic. And they're down here. The Phoenicians were Semitic. And obviously, we know the use of the word Semites is quite familiar. All right. So the Pashtuns are Indo-European. They're not. This is not a Mongoloid face. This is not a Turkic face. This is an Indo-European face, and we all remember this famous shot of the girl at the beginning of the problems in Afghanistan, and here she is 20 years later. So how did the Indo-European language get down to the area where the Pashtuns are? It was brought down by Aryan invaders who heard that there was a real nice civilization along the Indus River. And they said to themselves, let's go down there and see what they've got going. It's better than life here in the middle of Turkmenistan. So down they go, they're warriors. We're talking the Aryan invasion was about 1,500 BCE. And the Indus civilization had been going for at least 1,000 years more. And so they came down as conquerors, and what they set up was a new religion. They had the Vedas were the beginning of it, and it evolved to Hinduism with Brahmins at the top, and that was Indo-Europeans at the top. The Dravidians, the people that they conquered, either disappeared or moved south. So if you look at a map of India and the language spoken, it's northern India, Indo-European languages, and then in the south, Dravidian languages. So obviously this is going to affect the people hanging out in the mountains of the Hindu Kush, and that's our target group. So here's the Hindu Kush, Here's the Indus River Valley. And this is the home turf of the Pashtun people. Probably the first reference to them were people living in Bactria. So let's look at the geography. You see that northern India is surrounded by mountains, and that's been protective of them until somebody found the way through. Probably wasn't, the Aryans weren't the first ones, but they were the ones that had the most lasting effect, come roaring down on their chariots, and they found a way through to the Indus Valley. And here's a close-up of that. You'd think logically, gee, they should go down here, but that's not how it worked. As they came down, there was a more natural way to get down higher up here. And this is it. This is Kabul, and this is Peshawar, and in between is the Khyber Pass. So you can see it's pretty far north of, say, Karachi, but this is the avenue where the conquerors first came down. Eventually, the Aryans taking all of northern India, but there's going to be wave after wave after wave of people coming down through there. The last being the Mughals who built the Taj Mahal, but we're getting way ahead of our story. So this is a close-up of the Khyber Pass here down in the plains. This map came from British times. And we'll talk about the Brits eventually. But this is what it would have looked like before big roads were built. Just think of who first saw that. Hey, guys, I think I see a way down. A natural break in the mountain ranges. Very strategic part. So now we're ready to talk about another civilization, the Persian civilization, also an Indo-European language, also very influential in the area where the Pashtos live. They weren't known as Pashtos then. I'll talk about when that started. But this was the Achaemenid Empire. We know they conquered Egypt. We know they threatened Greece, and Greece heroically fought them back, changing civilization forever. They were centered in Persepolis, where Aiko and I have visited. They built a royal road, and here's Bactria. Remember, I said this is the first place where the Pashtuns hung out. People that were later be called Pashtuns hung out. And maybe those people in the mountains fought against, if not Cyrus, then his son Darius, but there were quite a few Dariuses. This fellow, Alexander the Great, brings us to the next big civilization that this area has been exposed to. And what a huge leap that was for the area when Alexander came through. But to get to Afghanistan, he had to first kill Darius III, which he did in an epic battle, 333 years BCE. And this Darius III is 200 years after Darius the Great, the son of Cyrus the Great. Okay, we've taken care, we've opened the road through Persia, now on to the east. And Alexander famously heads off, a great warrior, a giant in history, because he takes Greek culture all the way across Persia. Here's Bactria again. Here's the Hindu Kush. He goes down probably through something like the Khyber Pass. I looked it up. They think it was the Khyber Pass, and fights the Indian dynasty in charge at the time in an epic battle and wins. They're on their home turf. They've got elephants, but his Macedonian warriors are very capable and adapt. And we see that Alexandria goes even all the way up to both rivers that come out of the Aral Sea, and he leaves a lot of names of cities after himself, of which one will be Kandahar. The Kand is Alexander. Alexander had something like this to say. Who knows if this is a direct quote, but he says, fighting these tribal people, everyone in this land can be called an Alexander. They're brave, they're lion-like. Now, the source of this, I'm gonna immediately be skeptical about. I did, as I was doing my research, consume what the Pashtuns believe about themselves. As we've discovered over and over again, when you're studying civilizations, truth is nice, but there's a lot of untruths that people believe that determine history, the myths. And I think almost every civilization needs some myths. And this is one story. There's going to be a couple of more, but this is a claim that Alexander was impressed by the forerunners of the Pashtuns. Again, they weren't called Pashtuns then. Alexander left his mark. He built cities. He established and strengthened the existing Silk Road. We'll take a closer look at that in just a second. When he died, these areas were divided into different kingdoms. This is the eastern part of the world. Egypt and along the Mediterranean, the Levant were also divided into different Macedonian type kingdoms headed by Macedonian generals. And we see a new entity replacing the Persians, the Parthians. And I forgot to mention that Buddhism is going to come into the picture. And that's an interesting story. But these cities, the ruins of them are still to be seen in Afghanistan. And this is a bigger version of the previous map about the Silk Road and what was the what was traded. And a big item from heading from east to west is horses. And we certainly talked about the history of horses when we talked about Genghis Khan. But the steppes, great sources of horses, and horses were becoming more and more valuable as part of your armies. Here's Bactria again, still on the map, and this Alexandria becomes Kandahar, or maybe it's this one. I'll have to double check, but there's a lot of Alexandrias. And so you get this communication. That's what Alexander did. His lasting contribution to history was to connect the Mediterranean culture with the Chinese culture. So now you call that globalism. That's globalism. And the other interesting thing is what people believed. And so the successors of Alexander introduced a new god, Serapis. He was an amalgam of a Greek god with an Egyptian god, and maybe Alexander himself lived on. So enter the steps. I want to just review what we've talked about before with the steps and how they're the engine of a lot of history. And they're going to provide one more tribe that's going to come roaring down and really add a value to the Silk Road. There's a big fight going on in the west of China as to who is going to be the primary raiders of China. The Yuezhi, or also known as the Kushans, versus the predecessor of the Huns. And finally, the Huns win and say, get out of here. We've got the China franchise. And so the Yuezhi, the Kushans, they head out into the steppes. And here they wind up. They come down from the steppes and are on the edges of the Parthian Empire. And they figure it out, and they conquer huge sections of the Parthian Empire. And here is the Kushan Empire. And they now have control of Bactria, the area. So this is part of the Pashtun heritage, the Kushan Empire. Another look at it as it spreads across the steppes and down into India. And this is their great leader, Kanishka, reigning over the Kushan Empire. And he's going to do something very important. He's going to oversee the adaptation of the Greek alphabet to accommodate the Kushan language. This isn't that difficult as it would be if he weren't Indo-European. The Yuezhi, or the Kushans, are the last Indo-European tribe to leave and come down from the steppes. From now on, it's not going to be Indo-European tribes coming down from the steppes. It's going to be Altaic tribes coming down from the steppes. But the other thing they do is a religious revolution. They get there and they find the worshiping of Serapis. And so they go through a stage where they honor that. They look at this. They've pushed the Parthians out, but they're going to do something even greater. Kanishka the Great is going to convert to Buddhism. Buddhism has taken over India at this time. Buddhism is the reigning religion for about 400 years. It was a reformation, basically, of Hinduism. Just like Martin Luther reformed Catholicism, the Buddha reformed Hinduism. He was a Brahmin, and he said, but this is no way to run a railroad. This is no good. This is too brutal. The caste system is not good. And so he introduces this idea. It's part of the axial age, the great intellectual age forward, where we got to find a better way to run the world. Sound familiar? I'm waiting for another axial age. Hope it comes soon. and Kanishka the Great becomes a Buddhist, and he organizes parleys. He gets all the Buddhist scholars of India together to hammer out a unified code that they could all agree on. And we've famously seen the Gandhara Buddha that combines Greek drapes with the features of a typical Buddha from India. So this just personifies the enduring level of Greek influence and the blending. And of course, these are the famous Bamiyan Buddhas that the Taliban blew up the last time they were in power. This was a sketch from a long time ago, even before photography, where you had a camel and you get an impression of what it was like. And then this is before they were blown up, but they had deteriorated quite a bit. They were built in 500 CE, and the Kushan still had some influence. So we get now the Silk Road. The Kushans guarantee it. They provide the security. They provide way stations. In their section of the Silk Road, this has been the most fraught, but they get everybody, hey, we're all Buddhists here. Let's let these caravans pass. Interesting story of Buddhism in China. So the first introduction of Buddhism to China was in the 2nd century, when an Indian Buddhist monk walked to China. People usually remember, oh, it was the Tang dynasty. Well, 400 years before the Tang dynasty, you had Buddhist missionaries walking from India to China, walking on the Silk Road. Then famously, you get this Tang monk who has studied Buddhism, and he decides to go see firsthand what's going on. Many different ways to spell and say his name. Xuanzang is the one I'm going to settle on. And this is how he walked down here, probably through the Khyber Pass, down into India, toured India, and then he eventually sailed home. So this here are the stops with modern names attached to them: Jalalabad, Peshawar, which is at the east end of the Khyber Pass. And here he is today, and commemorated in China. We've been there. This I think it's the Goose Pavilion, if I'm remembering it right, built in his honor. Kabul is situated to the west of the Khyber Pass. Kabul has been a crossroads for 3,500 years. So all these civilizations that I've talked about here before, they knew about Kabul. It's east-west, north-south crossroads. And the north, we think of the Silk Road as being the big road. It was the east-west road, but there was a lot of north-south trade, and that involved these adventuresome Indian traders that I talked about earlier, and it passed through Pashtun country. So the Pashtuns were involved in that. They were mostly economically pastoralists, but they certainly participated in the trade economy. So the Khyber Pass again, just an update on after some roads were built. Indian merchants even used elephants, taking wares across the plains and up into the Central Asia. And one of the casualties of the recent Taliban takeover is Indian aspirations to recreate their contact with Central Asia. And to do that, all paths had to go through Afghanistan, and obviously Pakistan is just a huge barrier between them. But they had sunk a lot of money into Afghanistan in the last 20 years. So they're a big loser too. They had harbored ideas of pipelines going across Afghanistan. Obviously, there were going to be some tough negotiations with Pakistan. But you'll remember there are a lot of connections between Afghanistan and India. Hamid Karzai, one of our early proteges, went to university in India, and a lot of Afghanis go to university in Afghanistan. A lot of Afghanis get their medical care in India. In India. This is more modern. Obviously, when we were supplying our troops, Khyber Pass was a big thing, and we had a lot of tension with Pakistan over keeping it open. Sometimes they just shut it down. The Kushan Empire, here's Gondra, where we saw that Buddhist statue draped with the Greek clothing. The map's too dark, but it again shows the location of the Khyber Pass through the mountains further north than you'd think. So Kushans were a valuable link connecting Rome with Han China later on. Here's a new Persian warlord that is causing some trouble. But you have the Silk Road fairly well established. We'll get to the point where it gets interrupted. But at the time of the Kushan Empire, there was a lot of goods going back and forth, and there are a lot of ideas going back and forth. Buddhism itself influenced Stoic philosophers, who in turn influenced Christianity. It wasn't just goods going back and forth on the Silk Road. As we said, you had missionaries, you had ideas. This was really the Hellenism that globalized, at least for a few centuries. And you see here, horses make the map. Again, very important part of what the East has to offer the West. So now we're going to leave behind the Indo-European and have to deal with a new influence, the Altaic tribes. First the Huns, then the Mongols, and then the Turks. And this will be a good place to stop. We'll restart with Huns next time, and I'll stop for questions.
I had one question. How the amount of work, civilization, building of cities that Alexander did as he's moving across, bringing Macedonian type Greek culture into that area. How long was he alive? How long were his administrations running?
Oh, very short. Very, very short. So
that's amazing transformation of civilization for sure.
Yeah. Well, you remember he had a good teacher. His tutor was Aristotle, and I can't remember how much of the trip Aristotle accompanied them on. But he was very, very enlightened. He was open to new ideas. He met a Jain priest along the Indus. And he was really impressed that this Jain monk didn't wear any clothes, just a loincloth. And he thought, wow, this is new, this is different. And he wouldn't, he wouldn't kill a bug. He was very careful with his diet. And that got Alexander's attention. So he persuaded this monk to head back with him. And as they were heading back and they reached the Persian plateau, the Iranian plateau, it got cold and the monk died. But I just offer that as an example of how open he was. So he accomplished a lot in a very short time. He died in his mid-30s. And
what?
Yeah.
And he did all that?
Yep, he did all that. He got an early start. His father was Philip of Macedonia.
Right, I remember that. Yeah.
And he gave him a good push, gave him a good education. What he died of, nobody knows. It might have been alcoholism. It might have been malaria. He might have been poisoned. Nobody knows. A lot of speculation.
Thank you. Wow. Big impact, short life.
Yeah. Even more than the Pizarro brothers.
Yeah.
Did Alexander die? Didn't he die when he was still on his travels?
Yes.
Did he actually?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. He died, I think, in Iraq on his.
Okay.
He was pretty close to getting home. I think he made it off the Persian plateau.
I thought he died of diarrhea.
Nobody knows. That's always a good bet.
I'm surprised that the Pashtuns have that Kushan heritage.
Yeah, they were Buddhist. And this came up to me recently because somebody was saying, well, you'll see when a later slide will say, hey, the Pashtuns were monotheistic fairly early. Maybe it was Zoroastrianism. And the answer to the question was no, it wasn't Zoroastrian, it was Buddhism.
But I would, I don't want to second guess what you're going to say next week, but I would have thought having the Kushan influence and the Greek influence, that they would be a lot more liberal.
Well, they're tribal. Remember, I said they're primarily pastoralists, right? So they're participating in the economy. It's not like they're a huge influence at this time. They become a huge influence in Mughal times, but that's another 1,000 years away from where we are right now. But they're a tribal people, and you'll see just from the geography, they're up in the mountains. And if they ever come down from the mountains and there's any trouble, they go back up into the mountains. And they're migratory pastoralists, so they head south in the winter and north in the summer. So they don't they're tribal. They're not leading intellectuals at this point.
So when you say that they had tremendous influence during the Mughal Empire, were they conquered by the Mughals? Or were they just separate from the Mongols and used, or who was head?
All the above. The Mughals conquered them. They conquered the Mughals. It goes back and forth for a while, and then they become part of the Mughal Empire in the same way the Persians became part of the Islamic ruling class. It was Arab, but their right-hand men were Persians. And the Mughals finally co-opted the Pashtuns and said, okay, look, why don't you become our generals? You become our that. So they were very much involved. And it was because of their hardiness and their military prowess, not their intellectual capability. The Pashto language didn't get written down until 500 years ago. So there's not a lot of intellectual heritage that was in an enduring form. It was all oral.
So if the Pashto language was not written until recently, though it is Indo-European, right?
It's Indo-European.
And Indo-European languages were always written, weren't they?
Well, sure, but there's dialects, and if you don't have a form of writing, you're not going to write down your dialect until you get a form of writing, and then you'll write it down.
But you think that, like with the they had a lot of influence with the Persians coming through and the Kushans coming through the other side, and these are two pretty cultural groups. You'd think that they would absorb some of that.
Well, 500 years ago is that's not too bad. I mean, you would have hoped that it would have been earlier than that, but I mean, the Navajos never wrote down their language, and that's why they were the code talkers.
Well, I can't wait until we find out more about them, because it seems like they've got a lot of influence from some pretty major civilizations.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to give the background. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It's really helpful. Very helpful.
It must have been very convoluted.
Yeah,
they're so, like Ike was saying, they came from this background that seems like it's really rich and much more cosmopolitan, and it's become much, seems like it's more constricted.
yeah, that's how I was thinking the same thing, Aiko. Or Opal or Aiko.
Well, Opal is my political name, because I don't want to say when I'm calling for Newsom.
I explained earlier, dear.
So I'm Opal.
Do you realize you're still recording? I think. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, and anybody have anything else to say? I'll stop recording. Anything?
Thank you.
I just have a question. Pashtuns, are they? So I think of them as one tribal group of Afghanis. Is that true, or how are you thinking of Pashtuns? Are they Pashtuns? You're thinking this is. Are you talking about them as a collection of different tribal groups within Afghanistan? How do I think about Pashtuns? Please tell me.
So, I said claim number one that they had. Another claim that they had was that they were actually the lost tribe of Israel. Another claim that they had was their founding father, their George Washington, in legend, actually went and met with Muhammad. All right. So this guy comes back and he has 3 sons. And guess what happens? Each son gets a part of the tribe. So there are 3 major branches of the Pashtun tribal system. But guess what? each branch has branches and sub-branches.
Okay.
I'm not going to get into that level of detail, I promise you.
Okay.
But there's three major branches, and that's probably where I'll draw the line.
So, but does Pashtun then refer to all Afghanis?
Yes.
They do?
Now, yeah, Pashtun and Afghan are interchangeable. Now,
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, but what about the people in the north?
okay. So there's and I'll show you, I've actually drawn out a little sketch. There's a triangle of tension within the Pashtuns. One is their tribal organization. Another is the demands of belonging to a universal religion, which makes demands of them that aren't in keeping. So their Sharia law is not consistent with their Pashtunwali. So there's that tension. And then when you get nationalism, and that doesn't come until like 1750 with the Durand dynasty. Now you get a third complication, a third source of identity, and that's the nationalism. So it gets all mixed in, and there's going back and forth, and sometimes they're thinking more like they're Pashtuns, sometimes they're thinking they're more, oh, wait a minute, I live in the part of the Pashtun world that's in Afghanistan, but twice as many Pashtuns live in Pakistan. So when nationalism rears its head and demands a loyalty, like then all of a sudden things switch. The Soviet Union invades. We're all Pashtuns now, and the nationalism between Afghanis and Pakistanis gets blurred. But it's complicated. But it confused me at first too, and then somebody pointed out, just say that Pashtuns are synonymous with Afghani. Now, Aiko brings up an important exception, and that's when if you're just talking within the national sphere, not the Pashtun sphere or the religious sphere, then it gets more complicated. You got Tajiks, you got Uzbeks, you got the Baluks,
Hazaras, yeah.
Wow.
Can I ask you something? One question. Who today, where they live, who today can say, I'm Bactrian?
Nobody.
Nobody?
No, nobody. I think Bactria might be I'm not even sure it's a province. So I'm going to say nobody for now, but I will research it and report back next week.
Good.
Well, where does the Taliban fit in this? I mean, where did they come from?
Well, they're going to be a interesting addition to the religion. And what they bring to the table is a overarching religious umbrella that says, hey, Pashtuns, identify with international Islam. And it's going to get even more complicated later on. But that the Taliban is seen as an exception. Hey, we can identify primarily with the Taliban for a while because they have international allies that help us with our other goals. And then as soon as those goals are reached, then they push the Taliban away. And now international goals, ISIS comes in and says, hey, Taliban, you're no longer international Islam. We're international Islam. You're parochial. And so the Taliban gets power again and say, hey, you've been bad mouthing us for a while now. And so they go into the prisons, when they took Kabul, freed a lot of political prisoners, but the main ISIS guy, they took him out and executed him.
Oh, wow.
Just recently?
This last week. So believe me, identity and religion and nationality and tribalism, it gets all mixed up. And that's why I'm starting to make sketches.
They're really helpful for me to understand.
Yeah.
I very much appreciate your reduction to graphs. I take photographs and put them in my photo collection so I can go back and go, what was that? Yeah.
That's the way my mind works too.
Yeah, it's very visual. Thank you so much.
Could I stop recording, or is there any other relevant Pashtun questions? Because I do have, okay, I'll stop.